Punk is one of my all-time favorite genres in music, and there's a lot of different avenues that you can take to get into the genre, as there are a multitude of different subgenres and styles that go along with it. But if you have absolutely no clue where to start, this video will give you a good jumping off point. I'm going to be breaking down and discussing 5 records that in my opinion are absolutely essential listening to get into punk music. These records span mostly from the early period of the genre's history and are either extremely influential records on the genre or are historically significant. Now before I truly get into the list, I do want to bring up that this is only my opinion of the best records to start with. This isn't a top 5 best punk albums video or a top 5 best punk bands video. This is simply a video for people who want to dive into punk and need a good place to start. And while I am aware that people have different tastes, at least 1 or 2 of these records will come up if you ask a fellow punk fan what records to check out first. So with that, let's hop in, shall we? This is 100% the first album you should hear if you want to get into punk. The Ramones basically laid the foundation for every single other punk band that came after them, and it'd be hard to find any rock band period that doesn't list them as an influence. This album is the quintessential punk record. Its cover is insanely iconic, and the music is just as good. Now I do want to bring up before I really get into the meat of this album that this record doesn't necessarily define who the Ramones were. The album is definitely the rawest that the band ever sounded, and the production style makes it a black sheep in their catalog. After this record, they released records like Leave Home, Rocket to Russia, and Road to Ruin, which polished things up a tad bit, and ditched the pan-style production that this record has. So why did I choose the self-titled instead? Those other Ramones records are in my opinion just as essential as this one is. Well, because without this album, punk would not be punk whatsoever. This record deserves a lot of credit for basically making punk rock what it is, and that's why it's here. And the music indeed lives up to the significance. Blitzkrieg Bop is a song that even if you aren't a punk fan, you've heard. It sends the record into the stratosphere almost instantly, and it's a perfect way to start any band's career. Beat on the Brat, Judy is a Punk, and I Want to Be Your Boyfriend follow suit in quick succession, and these 4 songs alone are some of the most iconic and best that the Ramones ever laid to tape. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the record drags, because there are highlights all throughout its under half an hour runtime. 53rd and 3rd is a fantastic chorus and beady vocal performance. Loudmouth, where the lyrics haven't aged that well, is one of the more rocking tracks on the album, and Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World is easily the best closer of their entire discography. Joey Ramone is one of my favorite vocalists, frontmen, and just people in general of all time, and the style and flair that he adds to the band in this record is unmatched. Johnny Ramone downpicks the shit out of his guitar in basically every Ramones album, and this one is no exception, with the guitar work being simple but fantastic nonetheless. And while the drumming on the record isn't anything crazy, I do have to give props to Tommy for keeping the heart beating on all these tracks. So overall, this album is absolutely fantastic, and without a doubt the first punk record that you should hear.
This I like!
For this album, there's a lot that I could say about it, but I figured that I'd take this one to my good friend Landon from the Theater of the Phantom channel to talk about why this album is as essential as it is to punk rock.
Punk rockers, the new craze, they tell me. They're heroes, not the nice, clean Rolling Stones. You see, they're as drunk as I am. They're clean by comparison. They're a group called the Sex Pistols, and I'm surrounded now by all of them. Just let us see the Sex Pistols in action.
Hey, it's me, Theater of the Phantom. You might know me from my garbage Lords of Chaos video, and that's it. But I'm here to talk about the Sex Pistols' one and only album, Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. Nevermind the Bollocks was an album released on October 18th, 1977 by a group of rebellious 20-year-olds from the UK called the Sex Pistols. The band formed in 1975 and are well known for their stage presence, most notably their asshole singer Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious, who would often appear high on heroin and cut himself on stage. Now, why exactly is this album an essential? This album, although not the debut of punk, would shape the way punk would be for years to come. This album included lyrics of abortion and slander of the Queen. The one song in particular that the people around the UK found trouble with was the track God Save the Queen, where Johnny Rotten refers to the Queen as a fascist who doesn't care about England's dreams. Many record stores refused to sell the album due to the word bollocks on the cover, as many people found that word offensive. Its lyrics showed rebellion in that they didn't care what people thought of them. They refused to follow the norms of what music was in the 70s and gained a very controversial image. The Pistols were known to swear on live TV and often have engagements with the audience, whether it be spitting, bleeding, or fighting. In my personal opinion, my favorites on this album would include No Feelings, Bodies, and Submission. Overall, this album defined punk and made it the way it is today.
This is your life!
Dead Kennedys are easily my favorite punk band, and one of my favorite bands of all time in general, but it wasn't always like that for me. The first time I ever heard Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables, I didn't connect with it whatsoever, and never really came back to it. But this record is an absolute grower, and it has a ton of replay value, with some driving messages and musicianship all throughout it. Dead Kennedys were definitely a band with some musical talent, more so than their contemporaries, and that gave the music a slick edge compared to all the other punk music going on around them, which made them stand out from the crowd. Fresh Fruit is an absolutely fantastic debut album, with some of the band's most well-known songs on it, such as California Uber Alice, Holiday in Cambodia, and Kill the Poor. The latter being one of the best opening tracks on any punk record ever. Jello Biafra brings a lot of character to the vocals on this album, and in all honesty, he basically is Dead Kennedys. Without Jello, while the band is super talented, they definitely wouldn't have that little extra bit of charm and attitude that makes them so alluring. That element of the band is most seen on the closing moment, the cover of Viva Las Vegas, which works exceptionally well with Jello's warbly vocal delivery. But as for the rest of the album, there are highlights to be found all throughout. The back-to-back hit of When You Get Drafted and Let's Lynch the Landlord is one of my favorites on the record, and they're some of the record's strongest offerings. Drug Me is crazed and manic with a fast pace, and the same can be said about the track Chemical Warfare, which apart from the really awesome bridge which slows things down a bit, is an unhinged ripper with an absolutely chaotic ending. I Kill Children let listeners know how little fucks Dead Kennedys really gave, and the classic tracks all throughout this record boosted up highly in my eyes as a punk classic. If you don't dig this record upon first listen like I did, I highly recommend checking out their compilation record, Gimme Convenience or Gimme Death. It's my personal favorite release in the band and features the single versions of California Uber Alice and Holiday in Cambodia, as well as some live jams. It really gets you more used to the band's sound, and you'll go to find more enjoyment out of Fresh Fruit after hearing it. But even if you don't take that route, repeated listens will definitely make this record reveal its magnificence, and with it being such an important release, I had to include it here. Okay, so let me be completely honest here and say that I'm honestly not a massive Black Flag fan, at least not of the Henry Rollins era. However, they are one of the most important punk bands ever, with them basically carving out the path for all the hardcore bands that came after them. They were notorious in the venues that they played at for getting the cops called to the shows and for the acts of violence the crowd took part in. During their most prominent and important years as a band, their frontman was Henry Rollins, who later on started a multitude of other projects, but they had many other lead vocalists before him, including my personal favorite, Keith Morris, who later went on to form the Circle Jerks, which is one of my favorite punk bands, and appears in one of the band's most well-known tracks, Nervous Breakdown. Greg Ginn is the mastermind and driving force behind the band, however, and really helped to get their name out there. Now, the reason that I explain this history to you is because in my personal opinion, Black Flag are a more interesting band from an historical standpoint than a musical standpoint, especially when discussing the Henry Rollins era. That doesn't mean that the music isn't worth listening to, but I feel like the history of the band has a whole lot more to delve into than the actual band and the music itself. However, Damaged is a great record nonetheless. It has an extremely raw sound, which is made very apparent by the opening track Rise Above, which is a punk anthem with a shout-along chorus and hardcore swing. The album is overall pretty angry and serious in a lot of the tracks, such as Depression, What I See, Police Story, and Gimme Gimme Gimme, with TV Party being the only real humorous track on the album. Being one of the band's most well-known tracks, it's definitely a standout moment here with the silly-ass lyrics and a riff that's extremely different from the rest of the record. Overall, though, if you've never really listened to hardcore, this is most definitely one of the records that you should start with, as the album and Black Flag in general are given credit for bringing popularity to the subgenre and the punk scene. This album, similarly to the Ramones' self-titled, is also kind of a one-off for the band, and the only real straightforward punk album they made, as the succeeding releases such as My War and Family Man delved into long-joining experimentation, sludge metal, spoken word, and instrumental, and it's definitely where the band hit a creative peak, and it's probably my favorite stuff from them. This is overall, though, a great place to start if you want to get into hardcore and Black Flag in general. Minor Threat are one of the most iconic and well-known hardcore punk bands of all time, and probably the most hardcore band that you'll find on this list. Their main driving force is Ian MacKaye, who is an extremely prolific musician and songwriter who formed the insanely influential punk band Discord Records, and who later went on to form Fugazi. But Minor Threat was really his first project to gain any sort of traction, with their first two releases, the Minor Threat EP and the In My Eyes EP, being extremely influential to the hardcore punk scene, and eventually ended up spawning an entire movement on the straight edge. Minor Threat subsequently became the leading band in the DC punk scene, and their full-length debut album, Out of Step, only helped to cement that further. The band had actually broken up for a short while in 1982 before reconvening to record the record, and the musicianship of the band greatly improved from the last two releases. Songs like Cashing In, Betray, and Look Back and Laugh show the band experimenting with new sounds and expanding the length of their tracks, while also adding and improving on older numbers such as the song Out of Step from their Minor Threat EP. The record packs a mean and vicious punch, with Betray coming right out of the gate with one of their best riffs of their entire career, and throughout the whole record, the whole band really shows off how much they've improved at their instruments since the last release. The record's sound inspired so many bands, and is known to be one of the most influential hardcore punk records ever made. Minor Threat wouldn't last much longer after this record, only releasing one more fantastic EP known as Salad Days before disbanding, but the small amount of music that they released in their short time as a band was extremely important, and without them, hardcore definitely wouldn't be known for what it is today. Punk is a vast genre, and I hope with this video I was able to get you started in listening to it. Here's thanks to Landon for featuring in this video, by the way. His channel Theater of the Phantom is linked below. He makes videos about metal and horror movies, so if you're into that stuff and like what you heard from him in this video, then definitely subscribe to his channel. Expect more videos and reviews soon on the channel. I'm definitely planning on getting that March/April music video for music I enjoyed and whatever, because I didn't do one for March, so I'm putting them together. And yeah, expect some Vinyl Finds videos soon, and just overall some extra content. I'm really excited to get this video out. This has been one of my favorite projects I've done so far. So yeah, I'll see y'all in the next video, and stay smooth.